Evidence secured at marker 4. Advise command we are holding the scene.
Copy that. It's getting heavier out here.
Investigators discovered something unexpected left behind. 40 days brought 40,000 nationwide tips. The clue changes everything. Yet Nancy Guthrie remains missing since February 1st, 2026, when someone breached her quiet Tucson Catalina Foothills home, snatching her into the absolute darkness. Her family keeps fighting. The FBI keeps working. Today we step back inside that house, because what investigators discovered sitting right there creates a reality far more disturbing than anyone following this case actually understands. What happened next? We hit that 40-day mark facing absolutely zero arrests and lacking any named suspects. We hold no confirmed proof of life, forcing everyone to ask one hard question. Where does this investigation actually stand right now? Forget the polished press conferences and comforting statements. We need the real answers built entirely from public records and actively speaking investigators. Sheriff Chris Nanos, of the Puma County Sheriff's Department, paints a public picture reflecting strictly measured optimism. He assured reporters early this March that investigators stand definitively closer today than they stood at the very beginning. He cited significant active intelligence accumulation, adding that teams develop fresh leads, and the investigation produces far more detail than officials share publicly. The FBI echoes this exact framing. One retired FBI special agent tracking the investigation told Newsweek they consider it a red-hot case. They noted up to 100 agents, analysts, Puma County Sheriff's officers, and local police actively working actionable leads. Pay attention to that characterization. When this specific agent says red-hot, she offers more than simple encouragement. She completely guarantees the trail never went cold. She insists the heat remains, pointing somewhere specific. Meanwhile, the financial reward pool grows massively every day. The Guthrie family committed $1 million of their personal money, payable exclusively upon NY's recovery. The FBI reward totals $100,000, doubling their initial offer. Private donors pushed the total past $1,200,000. Tip lines at 1-800-CALL-FBI and 520-35149 stay fully staffed. The FBI specifically relocated video analysis resources into Phoenix to manage the massive surveillance footage volume. Officials established a dedicated FBI task force, moving 4 Puma County sheriffs, detectives, and 1 sergeant full-time into the Tucson FBI field office for exclusive focus. Yet the complete picture requires exposing the details they refuse to discuss during press conferences. Are they hiding something? Lawyers filed a $1,300,000 civil lawsuit against Sheriff Nanos and the Puma County Sheriff's Department. Retired SWAT Commander Lieutenant Bob Kreider publicly stated that 98% of Nanos's own department gave him a no-confidence vote. One professional association representing Puma County deputies publicly labeled this specific investigation an ego case. Nanos absolutely denies that specific characterization. The FBI and Sheriff's Department lack the seamless operation those initial press appearances suggested, and the critical decisions made during those earliest hours of investigation, decisions Nanos completely acknowledges on record he would make differently today, created massive roadblocks the investigation still works around right now. The investigation remains highly active. The DNA analysis continues. These leads remain absolutely real. But the path from day one to today runs straight through specific choices that left forensic experts, retired federal investigators, and the public demanding answers to one question: did officials handle this case correctly from the start? Before judging the crime scene evidence, you must know exactly who Nancy Guthrie was and what her daily routines looked like inside that house. At 84 years old, she lived quietly inside that exact same Catalina Foothills home for more than 50 years. She raised her 3 children right there: Annie, Cameron, and Savannah. This neighborhood defined the quiet, cactus-dotted desert community style found along the Santa Catalina Mountains. Long-term residents knew everyone's daily routines, making serious crime a conversation that almost never came up during their daily lives. Nancy faced significant mobility limitations. Nanos stated publicly that she physically could not walk 50 yards completely by herself. A pacemaker regulated her heartbeat. Furthermore, she required daily heart medication that her family explicitly described as totally essential for her basic physical survival. We avoid discussing a manageable gap or something flexible for a few days. Missing this specific medication triggers serious physical deterioration within a 24-hour window. Savannah Guthrie stated it plainly. Her mother lived in constant pain, requiring that exact medication to survive. What really happened on January 31st, 2026 brought answers. Nancy spent that night visiting Annie's home, located roughly 4 and 12 miles away, sharing dinner and playing card games alongside her family. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cion, eventually drove her home safely. Property surveillance camera footage confirmed the garage door opening at approximately 9:48 p.m. before closing shut at exactly 9:50 p.m. He watched her enter, verified the garage door closed, and drove away. That marks the very last time any family members saw Nancy Guthrie before her sudden disappearance. The following morning, a close friend expected Nancy online for their weekly shared viewing of a local church livestream. Nancy never missed this daily ritual. Until today. Relatives called, but nobody answered the phone, so they drove over. They arrived sometime around 11 a.m. They scoured the property but found no trace. Around noon, they dialed 911. Patrol deputies pulled up at 12:15 that afternoon. What they discovered inside that house became the first, quietest evidence of what truly happened. Nancy's phone sat right on the counter. Her wallet remained completely untouched. Her daily cardiac medication, the exact pills, a woman with a pacemaker, and known heart vulnerability, absolutely could not safely go without sat precisely where she originally left it. The doorbell camera that normally hung right beside her front door? Completely gone. Not smashed, not covered up, gone. And then, as deputies slowly moved toward the front door, they found exactly what made this case what it is. When Pike County Sheriff's deputies initially processed that crime scene on February 1, 2026, they found a house already telling its absolute most important story in dried blood. Right on the front porch, trailing from the door out toward the driveway, sat droplets of blood. They were circular, contained, and belonging, as DNA testing would later confirm, directly to Nancy Guthrie. But right before federal investigators gained full access to that scene, before the FBI ever had the chance to conduct their own comprehensive forensic sweep, the sheriff's department completely released the property and crime scene. The tape came down, and reporters, including a crew from Arizona's Family News, were suddenly able to walk directly up to the front door, capturing footage of what Sheriff Nanos would later casually describe as blood droplets. The single most sensitive physical evidence in an 84-year-old woman's disappearance became completely accessible to local news cameras before it ever reached the vast resources of the FBI. When asked if he would have handled that decision differently today, Nano practically said it himself. Monday morning quarterbacking? Absolutely. I probably could have just held off on doing that. One retired master police officer from the Mesa Police Department actually called releasing the scene and providing such extensive public commentary the two biggest mistakes made in the case's early days. Michael Alcazar, a retired New York Police Department detective and an adjunct professor over at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, stated investigators probably dropped the ball a little bit by releasing that crime scene way too early. And Nanos, despite strongly defending his department's thoroughness, actually conceded this point on record. That specific blood on the porch has since become the subject of some of the absolute most rigorous forensic analysis publicly available in this entire case. 3 separate experts, each holding independent, high-level experience across FBI investigations, criminal profiling, and advanced forensic pathology. They examined this blood pattern and provided expert assessments the public can freely access, and every single one of them arrived at a slightly different piece of the very same disturbing picture. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell actively analyzed that blood pattern on the Brian Etten Investigates program back in early March. Her overall assessment was specific. She seriously doubted Nancy ever walked out of that house alive. Why? Because of what was fundamentally missing from the blood. There were absolutely no voids, zero footprint interruptions in that circular drop pattern. Whenever someone walks through a field of falling blood droplets, their passing footsteps always create distinct visible gaps, breaks in the overall pattern, serious disruptions in the spacing, or irregular shapes right where a foot or shoe physically interrupted the fall. Those distinct physical interruptions simply did not exist here. O'Connell's grim conclusion: Nancy was tightly wrapped in something and physically carried out. Because those droplet shapes remained intact as round spheres, she knew the blood fell completely straight down, not off a person in motion. And she went even further. She fully believed Nancy was carried out by two different people. The pattern clearly presented with NY's head tilted awkwardly, showing fresh blood actively dripping from her facial area. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bond offered his expert read during a revealing interview with Fox News Digital. The specific nature of those drops: they featured extremely pale centers. He explicitly described them as looking like donut shapes. In his analysis, this was incredibly typical for blood heavily mixing with air during a fall. That specific type of mixing remains most consistent with active bleeding from the nose or mouth. Barton's clinical conclusion was perfectly unambiguous. These were absolutely not innocent droplets. He knew this directly from their distinct shape, total number, and precise placement on that porch. They were, in his exact words, entirely consistent with, and directly indicative of, blood loss occurring during a violent abduction. He also noted the pattern strongly suggested Nancy was entirely unable, or simply had not even attempted, to stop her own heavy bleeding, which perfectly aligned with the working theory that she was fully unconscious or completely out of control of her movements as she was taken across that porch. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente, appearing on that exact same episode of Brian Enton Investigates alongside O'Connell, had a completely different reading that is equally vital to understand. He easily confirmed the drops fell straight down, matching the slow movement interpretation perfectly. But he strongly challenged the prevailing idea that Nancy was ever fully wrapped up. His core argument? If she was actually fully wrapped and yet still producing highly visible blood droplets outside, then the wrapping was entirely incomplete. And his alternative read of what that blood pattern really shows was, if anything, a clear sign of something much more defiant than simple unconsciousness. It proved Nancy Guthrie actually put up a serious fight, that something violent happened inside that house where she was injured, and that porch blood came from those fresh injuries as she was carried, or walked, right out. In Clemente's expert assessment, the blood proved she was probably still alive when she left the house. It showed somebody actively walking and bleeding. The pattern was definitely not what you would ever see from a dragging or sudden mortal wound. She was forcefully taken, she was actively bleeding, and she was highly likely still alive in those terrifying moments. 3 separate readings, 3 unique analytical frameworks, but all 3 point directly to the exact same chilling beginning of this forensic story. 41 minutes. That terrifying countdown conceals what someone did to Nancy Guthrie inside her pitch-black home. The nightmare started at 1:47 in, the morning when a doorbell camera went offline, and abruptly ended at 2:28, when a heart pacemaker severed its Bluetooth connection. The intruder ripped that entire recording device right off the wall and carried it away. At 1:47 in the morning, a figure stepped onto the porch wearing a black full-face ski mask, black gloves, light pants, and a dark jacket, hauling a 25-liter black Ozark Trail hiking pack. He strapped a holstered firearm directly across his front torso, keeping the weapon off his hip and back, centering it on his chest to guarantee immediate forward access. He clenched a penlight between his teeth, leaving both hands completely free. Marching straight at the camera, he studied the lens, raised one gloved hand to block it, yanked vegetation from the garden bed to blind the view, tore the hardware free from its mount, and vanished with the unit. He grabbed the unit knowing physical hardware stores digital evidence. He correctly understood the risk, but he falsely assumed his theft solved the problem. For roughly 10 days, the FBI partnered with Google engineers to excavate what digital forensics specialists call residual data. These data fragments survive inside back-end cloud infrastructure after someone unplugs a device and marks those exact recordings for permanent deletion. George Mason University Digital Forensics Program Director Jim Jones publicly broke down how this principle operates. Ripping a recording device off a wall successfully forces the system to stop filming new video, but previously captured footage routinely lingers inside cloud systems in a temporary state right before the servers permanently overwrite the files. The FBI extracted that temporary data. Investigators recovered digital imagery from the stolen device that the suspect confidently believed he destroyed forever. What did it show? That resurrected footage confirmed two details that immediately anchored the core of this investigation. First, it revealed the extremely detailed visual appearance of the masked porch intruder. Detectives analyzed his height, build, equipment, and his highly systematic movements. Second, detectives discovered an alternate set of images showing a figure walking the same property without the backpack and the front-mounted chest holster. The Puma County Sheriff's Department handled this specific detail with extreme caution. Their official statement clarified that those images lacked date or timestamps, warning that suggesting the photographs originated from different days represented pure speculation. They refused to confirm a prior visit. They explicitly rejected that specific timeline interpretation. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffin-Doffer introduced another jarring possibility, suggesting the individual lacking the backpack might represent a completely different person, an active accomplice walking the property that same night, operating without the tactical gear the primary actor hauled to the scene. Investigators definitively requested surveillance footage from every single neighbor inside a 2-mile radius, searching all the way back to January 1st, 1 full month before the abduction. Executing a neighborhood canvas that wide and chronologically deep breaks routine protocol. This aggressive sweep proves investigators strongly believed someone stalked that specific neighborhood long before the night Nancy vanished. The internal pacemaker timeline firmly closed that 41-minute window on the opposite end. At 2:12 in the morning, a second property camera registered a motion detection event. The system captured 0 video because her specific subscription tier completely excluded video recording capabilities, but it provided hard timestamp confirmation, proving something physically moved at that exact location during that specific moment. Then at 2:28 in the morning, the active Bluetooth connection between NY's Apple Watch and her cellular phone completely dropped. Bluetooth technology operates within an approximate 30-foot radius. When that digital sync broke, Nancy decisively exited that 30-foot perimeter surrounding her phone. She left the device inside the house. She moved outside. She entered a vehicle. She was totally gone. The final digital pulse tracking her body clocked her property departure at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. The severe medical significance defining that exact departure window demands intense attention. Sleep specialist Pat Byrne, who evaluated this exact issue on the Crime Stories with Nancy Grace podcast, spoke directly regarding the dangerous risk profile characterizing the event. Intruders violently waking an 84-year-old woman suffering from cardiac vulnerability and a pacemaker from deep sleep around 2 in the morning forces her into documented cardiac risk, completely independent of any inflicted physical injuries. Deep sleep cycles aggressively suppress standard human cardiovascular regulation, forcing an abrupt transition out of that state using sudden fear, extreme disorientation, and forced physical movement, alongside the terrifying presence of unauthorized strangers, generates extreme cardiac stress that immediately threatens elderly patients with highly serious cardiac events. Byrne labeled this medical risk as extremely high, specifically highlighting the deadly combination regarding the hour, her advanced age, the pacemaker, and the terrifying awakening. Intruders never needed to physically strike her to force her body into a severe medical crisis during the very first second of those 41 minutes. During the initial investigation phase, detectives also executed a comprehensive physical search covering the septic tank located at the property's rear perimeter. Photographers captured them removing the heavy manhole cover and aggressively probing the dark underground tank using long metal poles. Authorities completely refused to publicly disclose what prompted that specific search. But veteran investigators commenting on the case note this behavior points toward one grim reality. Systematically eliminating hiding spots is standard protocol during comprehensive crime scene work, utilized only when law enforcement firmly believes that a person or critical evidence remains concealed nearby. Investigators examined the tank. Whatever investigators found or missed there never went public in any way that drove the investigation into a dramatically new direction. The absolute most significant forensic discoveries in this case did not drop during those first chaotic days. They emerged over weeks of meticulous work, and the most crucial discoveries remain entirely unresolved. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Dafer spotted a critical detail the public conversation completely ignored while she reviewed the doorbell footage. Clearly visible inside the suspect's jacket pocket sat a distinctively square object featuring a large upward protruding antenna. Coffin-Dafer shared her specific assessment publicly through social media posts and during interviews with Newsweek. That device was a handheld walkie-talkie, not a Wi-Fi jammer, not a cell phone, a two-way radio. She made this specific point directly. If it were a jammer, it would have immediately killed the Nest camera's signal and disrupted NY's pacemaker connection. Neither connection dropped before someone physically ripped that camera away. This device was a communication tool, and communication tools point directly to someone actively listening on the other side of the channel. Coffin-Dafer drew a firm conclusion from that visual observation. He definitely had an accomplice, possibly more. There is absolutely no way this abduction occurred alone, she firmly stated. Think about the heavy coordination required disabling the camera, managing the property, and moving an 84-year-old woman across a porch into a transport vehicle. That absolutely demanded more than two hands. That walkie-talkie proved the individual on that porch maintained real-time contact with a partner entirely missing from all the recovered footage. Who was listening? Coffin-Dafer also noted what that device explained about a frustrating investigative dead end. Investigators utilized geofencing technology to identify every mobile device within the geographic area during that specific time frame. It apparently generated absolutely zero usable leads. She argued the reason sat right inside that footage. Walkie-talkie users never register on local cell towers, leaving zero digital trail. These perpetrators operated with enough sophistication to completely avoid phones. Meanwhile, inside the house, investigators recovered DNA belonging neither to Nancy Guthrie nor to absolutely anyone confirmed as having regular contact with her. In public statements, Sheriff Nanos directly called this evidence more critical than anything found far from the property. Far more critical than those gloves recovered 2 miles away. More critical than those items found scattered across the surrounding desert. This DNA came from inside the house, the exact physical space someone occupied during those 41 minutes. Whose was it? That question hit a wall. The sample represents a mixed profile. It apparently contains genetic material from multiple contributors. Mixed DNA profiles always present massive analytical complexities. Profiles constantly overlap. Separating individual genotypes from this massive mixture requires intense computational work taking significant time, which might never produce completely clean results, usable for standard database comparisons. Sheriff Nanos publicly acknowledged this exact complication himself, noting the mixture could hold DNA from several individuals, and the laboratory processing it actively battled through significant technical challenges. Determining exactly which lab processed that newly discovered DNA quickly became the entire investigation's most aggressively contentious development. When the FBI requested sending the home's DNA samples and those gloves directly to their National Crime Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. That facility ranks among the world's most advanced forensic processing centers. Sheriff Nanos outright declined. His department shipped the evidence instead to a private laboratory in Florida, holding a long-standing contract with Puma County. According to a federal official speaking directly to Reuters, they described this decision as risking further delays in a case growing massively more urgent by the minute. An FBI source, speaking to News Nation, sounded blunter. They called it completely dumb. They called it insane. They claimed the Bureau would likely have to completely retest the evidence upon retrieving it from the Florida lab, adding crucial time to an already highly pressured process. The federal official also highlighted earlier investigative setbacks, heavily suggesting the Florida lab decision did not stand as the only source of delay. Puma County reportedly spent roughly $200,000 sending evidence down to that Florida lab. Nanas strongly defended the move, emphatically stating he wanted all evidence consolidated in one location, keeping all existing DNA profiles and markers for the family and others perfectly together for proper cross-referencing. He emphatically denied that he was blocking the FBI from conducting anything. He slammed the reporting as completely false and furthest from the truth. He stated the FBI actually agreed his reasoning made perfect sense after he explained it. The FBI's position, reported through sources and officials, told a drastically different story. The blood samples, the glove DNA, and the interior house DNA all sat at that Florida lab. 0 database matches. The FBI just verified they are attacking that interior DNA using investigative genetic genealogy, IgG. IgG operates as the exact forensic weapon authorities deployed to expose Joseph James DeAngelo. Law enforcement captured the Golden State Killer in 2018, closing 40 years where his genetic materials spanned crime scenes without triggering a single database hit. Why did it succeed? IgG bypasses the requirement for a suspect to already exist inside any system. Investigators only need a relative. They hunt for anybody sharing sufficient genetic markers, pointing toward shared ancestry across public genealogy platforms. Specialized forensic genealogists then construct a comprehensive family tree directly from that partial overlap. They isolate by geography, filter by age, and cross-reference physical descriptions until cornering one specific individual. Police apprehended a 72-year-old DeAngelo right inside his own residence back in 2018. He serves consecutive life sentences today. Will this identical process crack the DNA abandoned inside Nancy Guthrie's home? Investigators are actively running it. Officials never publicly disclosed whether those early routing delays substantially impacted the true investigative timeline. However, the FBI formally stated their fastest route toward answers required heavily deploying federal resources alongside advanced technology. They insisted settling for anything less simply extended the Guthrie family's agonizing grief. Then came the gloves. Pairs recovered across the neighborhood opened their own highly complex chapter. Searchers located black gloves roughly 2 miles from the property, visually mirroring the specific pair worn by the suspect on doorbell footage. Technicians extracted DNA, submitting it straight into CODIS, a system housing over 26 million genetic profiles. 0 matches. Investigators eventually tracked that biological material to a nearby restaurant employee lacking any case connection. That lead officially died. An Arizona couple soon discovered blood-stained gloves beside a dried blood-covered rock, roughly 1 mile away. But initial DNA testing proved these completely missed matching the interior house samples. Searchers kept discovering more gloves at expanding distances, finding one nearly 10 miles out, while labs ran continuous forensic tests. This trail of discarded gloves forced one retired FBI agent to publicly analyze the intruder's escape routine. If the suspect shed gloves while fleeing, investigators must question what other evidence they dumped, sitting somewhere unseen. What else hides out there? 3 weeks deep, Fox News reporter Michael Ruiz located a vandalized utility box near Nancy Guthrie's residence, publicly raising the alarm. The Pima County Sheriff's Department verified they placed that box under review. This damage aligned perfectly with intelligence federal and local investigators already gathered while executing their door-to-door neighborhood canvassing operations. Detectives specifically asked locals about experiencing overnight internet blackouts on February 1st. One neighbor informed News Nation reporter Brian Enton regarding his Ring camera. Only his camera situated closest to Nancy's property displayed a not available error throughout those specific overnight hours. His 3 remaining cameras on that identical property functioned flawlessly. He never previously encountered that error message. The FBI probed an internet disruption directly linked to the abduction window. Coffender, alongside others, introduced the Wi-Fi jammer theory. Yet, her own counter-argument actively dismantled that very premise. If a jammer actually functioned properly, it would kill the Nest camera signal and Nancy's pacemaker connection before the intruder physically removed that recording device. Neither occurred. The investigation refuses to publicly confirm or eliminate any specific tactic deployed against digital neighborhood coverage that evening. That broken utility box remains under review. A Ring camera sitting roughly 2.5 miles away recorded an unidentified vehicle at 2:36 on February 1st morning, exactly 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker flatlined. The FBI firmly confirmed they are investigating this vehicle. During their most recent public update, they still had zero identification. Federal agents redirected video analysis units into Phoenix, specifically aiming to process the massive surveillance volume pouring from this area. Teams process hundreds of thousands of vehicles. One license plate reveals a registered owner. That owner becomes a prime lead. Countless veterans holding extensive federal law enforcement experience are now scrutinizing this case from the outside. Certain crucial details fail to connect neatly together. They avoid pointing anywhere specific, yet they pile up, aggressively forcing questions the public record fails to answer entirely. The very first glaring issue starts with events unfolding right before the FBI officially entered the investigation. On February 2nd, the exact day following Nancy getting reported missing, Sheriff Nanos informed NBC News an intruder abducted Nancy directly from her bed. 1 day later, he retracted everything, openly acknowledging zero evidence supported either claim. He never knew they took her from bed. He had absolutely no idea she was sleeping when the infiltrator finally reached her. He broadcasted those statements publicly toward a national audience during the most critical early investigative window, and they were completely false. Picture the ultimate physical evidence in a kidnapping. You expect a federal lockdown. Instead, investigators unlocked those doors almost immediately, completely bypassing a thorough FBI forensic sweep. Federal agents never gained total access before the property went completely public. Journalists stood right on the doorstep. Everyone saw the blood. An absolutely vital forensic goldmine. They exposed the absolute core physical evidence of a kidnapping to total strangers. Nobody even verified if experts had extracted every possible clue before letting the public inside. Nanos eventually admitted they messed up. His own deputies echoed that exact same dark conclusion. Several retired detectives went on the record agreeing. Then came the baffling choice about routing evidence. They bagged the indoor DNA. Nanos personally labeled this the most vital evidence, yet he shipped it to a private Florida facility instead of the FBI National Crime Laboratory in Quantico. The Bureau explicitly demanded that exact evidence. Federal agents practically begged the Florida lab just to get their own materials back. Insiders claimed they probably needed to completely retest those exact samples upon return. Time was openly ticking as a major factor. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and completely lacked her required cardiac medication. That blind choice added unnecessary hurdles to the most urgent forensic process in the entire investigation. Nanos held firm on his rigid reasoning. He demanded every piece of evidence stay centralized, keeping all profiles and markers together for precise cross-referencing. On the surface, you can defend that logic, but multiple channels reported the FBI fiercely pushing back. They argued that federal resources and advanced labs offered the absolute quickest route to catching the culprit. The official record reflects both stances. Senior officials publicly described this mounting friction as a massive operational roadblock. Then a glaring public contradiction surfaced regarding how Nanos framed the investigation's actual progress. Sitting down with NBC Nightly News in late February, Nanos firmly swore detectives were not pursuing any new suspects. Yet right around that exact time, numerous local Tucson businesses reported the FBI actively flashing lists of names and photographs as part of their hunt. The sheriff pushed one highly specific narrative. Federal boots on the ground painted a completely different, much darker picture. Who was really calling the shots? Detectives actively working the case reportedly could not tell if the sheriff or the FBI truly had control. Right then, the United Cajun Navy stepped up. This national volunteer search group, famous for deploying during massive missing person crises across the country, pitched Nanos a complete operational package. They offered specialized search dogs and cutting-edge drones to scour the brutal terrain surrounding the Catalina Foothills. The group's vice president went on record stating Nanos never even bothered to reply. A sheriff actively assuring reporters about constant forward momentum was simultaneously ignoring a massive deployment offer from an organization boasting a seriously proven track record. Nanos later claimed he rejected the external help over strict fears of contaminating the investigation. Critics fired back immediately. How could he fear contamination when journalists had trampled the bloody crime scene on day one? That entire contamination excuse carried some incredibly heavy baggage. Puma County Jail inmate Christopher Michael Marks slapped Nanos and the Puma County Sheriff's Department with a $1.3 million civil lawsuit. The detailed allegations inside that explosive filing remained completely buried from meaningful public view. Suing a sitting sheriff during a massive active investigation happens somewhat routinely, but the surrounding chaos during this specific arrival changes absolutely everything. His own deputies reportedly cast a staggering 98% no-confidence vote against him. Then, a fellow officer publicly accused him of morphing the investigation into a massive personal ego trip. Add to that an evidence access dispute with the FBI that both factions openly acknowledged. To top it off, the sheriff stood at a press conference and bizarrely confessed that managing the crushing pressure and public scrutiny of a case this massive was genuinely pretty new for him. Despite his decades wearing a badge, these actions do not legally prove criminal wrongdoing. Nobody has definitively established that these missteps totally destroyed the investigation, but look closely at what detectives actually accomplished after more than 40 long days. If you want to trace the timeline from the night Nancy vanished to this very moment, you have to scrutinize every single one of those choices. Every individual choice extracted a brutal toll. They sacrificed precious time, critical forensic opportunities, and the essential interagency trust that detectives desperately needed to bring Nancy home. Just 2 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished into thin air, the first ransom note hit KOLD News 13 in Tucson, straight through their online tip portal. A second threat hit that same outlet. Then one went straight to TMZ. Before detectives could even process the incoming communications, at least 3 distinct media networks possessed what looked like identical copies of the same sinister message. The kidnapper demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin across 2 aggressively escalating deadlines. They claimed Nancy was completely okay but terrified and coldly declared that all communication remained strictly one way. Once they set the terms, the talking stopped forever. The message explicitly warned the family that reaching back out was entirely impossible. They had absolutely no choice but to sit in agonizing silence and wait. They severed every single back channel. That structural blackout was a highly calculated choice. Nervous, impulsive criminals do not operate like this. This is the signature of someone who thought carefully about every single avenue investigators might use to trace them. The FBI special agent in charge of the Phoenix field office, Hythe Janicki, confirmed publicly that they strategically withheld 2 highly specific details in the note from the press before it arrived. First, the author knew the exact placement of Nancy's Apple Watch inside her home. Second, the letter correctly identified a broken floodlight located on the property, describing it as entirely destroyed. Fox News drone footage later verified 2 smashed floodlights dangling from wires in the backyard. You could not spot them from any public vantage point, and no preceding news coverage mentioned them. And the FBI explicitly stated that the Apple Watch placement remained a strict secret that public reporting never touched. Law enforcement sources confirmed both of these exact details, proved the note was entirely legitimate. It originated from someone who possessed actual, intimate knowledge of what sat inside that home. TMZ founder Harvey Levin read one note personally. He called it carefully crafted, grammatically perfect, highly structured, and deeply layered. He noted that the Apple Watch detail alone represented the exact kind of fact that would force the FBI to take the threat seriously immediately. KD anchor Mary Coleman received the first message at her station. She stated it held facts only someone actually holding Nancy for ransom could possibly know, details exclusively known to whoever stood right there when they took her. Then, authorities arrested 42-year-old Derek Calla from Hawthorne, California. They apprehended him on February 5, 2026, over a completely separate, unrelated communication. Calla texted Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Cioni directly. He completely bypassed the media, demanded Bitcoin payments, and hid his identity behind a voice-over IP number. The FBI tracked that number through open-source methods directly to Calla's Gmail account. Agents discovered those texts originated straight from his Los Angeles home. Prosecutors charged him with transmitting an interstate ransom demand and utilizing telecommunications devices to threaten or harass. The FBI explicitly labeled this communication an imposter ransom demand. It remained totally distinct from the notes sent to media outlets. Calla had absolutely zero connection to the abduction. The FBI made that clear. But his interference meant agents now had to meticulously verify every subsequent communication for authenticity before they could ever attempt a response. This injected immense friction into a negotiation process already suffocating under extreme time pressure. The authentic note, carrying the Apple Watch detail, established two deadlines. The first struck at 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 5th. The second deadline hit on Monday, February 9th. The authors described it as far more consequential, escalating their demand to $6 million. The family publicly announced they stood ready to pay. Savannah Guthrie collaborated with FBI negotiators on a video, speaking directly to whoever held her mother. Cameron Guthrie released his own video appeal right at the first deadline. The $6 million deadline expired. The funds sat entirely available, and whoever authored those notes, carrying inside knowledge of a broken backyard, floodlight, and the exact placement of Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch, never wrote back again. They provided no proof of life, no instructions, and zero response to the family's appeals. The silence became immediate and absolute. Sheriff Nannis admitted during a candid Daily Mail interview that the core motivation for this crime was exactly where he got stuck. He openly questioned if the ransom demand was even genuine or if it represented something else entirely. Was the motive actual money or something far more personal? He posed the question in his exact words. Is it really for money or is it for revenge for something? The lead sheriff put that precise question on the record to a reporter, and it still holds no public answer. But it mirrors the exact same dynamic the post-deadline silence reflects. Those notes contained facts the author simply should not have known. The deadline came and vanished without the response you would logically expect from a kidnapper genuinely intending to trade Nancy for money. Whatever the actual purpose of this crime was, the public record actively defies the standard profile of a straightforward, financially motivated ransom kidnapping. And that glaring dissonance between the precision of the crime and the deafening silence following the ransom demand remains the most critical, unresolved question in this entire investigation. When you analyze the assembled evidence closely, one definitive fact emerges for anyone paying attention. This strike was never random. The attacker clamped a penlight in his teeth while his hands systematically moved across that camera. He had executed operations like this before, or he had rehearsed it in obsessive detail. He carried a walkie-talkie in his pocket. Someone else listened. The ransom note arrived 2 days later, and it knew things. Detailing the exact location of an Apple Watch inside the house and the condition of a broken backyard floodlight proved the perpetrators possessed highly specific knowledge of that property's interior. You do not acquire that kind of knowledge simply passing a house on the street. 3 independent forensic professionals analyzed the blood on the porch. The pattern told a definitive story. They moved her. She did not walk. A security lens abruptly cuts to black. 41 minutes later, an internal pacemaker stops transmitting entirely. That silent window reveals an operation planned, executed, and finished with deliberate speed. Yet the figure wearing that specific jacket remains utterly unknown, despite being viewed by more people than practically anyone in recent American missing person history. Major news networks and social platforms across the English-speaking world broadcast these images constantly. But how did this phantom introduce himself? He stepped onto that patio bearing his own given name. He brought his own face, concealed behind a mask, directly toward a lens, capturing his exact height and physical build. It filmed his movement, his gear, and his systematic calm. Make no mistake, somebody who actually knows this man has watched this recording. Somebody recognizing that distinct jacket, those light-colored pants, or his specific doorway stance has watched it. Why do they stay perfectly silent? Fear, perhaps. But Coffender stated the reality plainly. The primary way investigators crack this case demands an acquaintance stepping forward. We never doubt the forensic evidence. Science will likely catch up to him eventually. However, the fastest route connecting today's current investigation with a definitive arrest leads directly through a human being, never a science lab. It demands a crucial conversation nobody has initiated yet. It requires an urgent tip nobody has dialed in yet. It hinges on a choice someone hiding this secret must make. What exactly do they know? They know the truth. Somewhere across this nation, an individual understands precisely what unfolded during those 41 minutes. They know the voice echoing over that walkie-talkie. They know the getaway driver. A Ring camera caught that vehicle at 2:36 in the morning, 2.5 miles away, who watched while he approached an 84-year-old woman's front door. He clenched a penlight between his teeth, executing a plan he previously visited this exact property at least once to rehearse. Who are they protecting? We must know. The tip lines stay open. Call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Submit online tips at tips.fbi.gov. Call Puma County Sheriff's Department at 520-351490. Authorities process all tips entirely anonymously. The standing reward for information securing NY's recovery or arresting anyone involved tops $1.2 million. If this investigation holds your attention, if you demand to be present when authorities finally deliver answers, cuff the suspect and rip that mask off completely. When detectives finally reveal the complete truth regarding what occurred inside the Catalina Foothills on the morning of February 1st. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications immediately. This active case keeps developing rapidly. The story remains unfinished.